Japan, 1945. The war had ended, but hunger hadn't. In the ruins of a small coastal town, a group of young Japanese women, former nurses and students, were captured and sent to an American relief camp. They expected punishment, humiliation, or starvation. But when the gates opened, they smelled rice steaming and bread baking. American soldiers, barely older than them, served food with quiet hands, not guns. The women stood frozen, tears mixing with disbelief. They had prepared to die, but instead, they were fed. For the first time, they realized mercy had a taste. September 1945. The coastal town of Shiogama lay in ruins, its fishing boats half submerged in the harbor, its streets lined with hollow-eyed survivors. The war had ended 2 weeks ago, but the silence felt heavier than any bombing raid. Naomi Takahashi, 24 years old, stood in line with 17 other women outside what remained of the town hall. She had been a nurse at the underground hospital in Tokyo until 3 months ago, when supplies ran out and patients began dying not from wounds, but from starvation. Her hands, once steady with surgical instruments, now trembled constantly. Beside her stood Yuki Matsumoto, 21, a university student whose education had been interrupted by mandatory war service. Yuki's eyes held the particular emptiness of someone who had watched too many friends die too young. American trucks arrived at dawn. The soldiers who emerged were impossibly young. Some looked barely 18, with sun-damaged skin and dust on their uniforms. They spoke in clipped English, gesturing for the women to board. "They're taking us to a camp," whispered Chieko, a former teacher. "I heard they starve prisoners. Work them to death." Naomi said nothing. She had heard the stories, too, propaganda broadcasts claiming Americans ate 1 meal a day and fed prisoners even less. She had heard that enemy soldiers showed no mercy, especially to women. In the hospital, she had prepared cyanide capsules for nurses to take if captured. The trucks rumbled north for 2 hours, past burned rice fields and skeletal villages. No one spoke. Some women prayed silently. Others simply stared. When they finally stopped, Naomi saw tall wire fences surrounding a compound of canvas tents and wooden buildings. Guard towers stood at each corner, not for keeping people out, she realized, but for keeping them in. A young American sergeant approached their truck. He was tall, with reddish-brown hair and tired blue eyes. His uniform bore the name Hale on the chest. "Welcome," he said in halting, accented Japanese. "You are safe now." Safe. The word felt foreign, almost insulting. How could they be safe? In enemy hands. The women were led through gates topped with barbed wire. Naomi's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, the moment of truth. Would they be separated, interrogated, left to starve in rows of cages? But as they passed through the entrance, something unexpected happened. A smell drifted across the compound. Warm, rich, impossibly comforting. Rice, steaming rice, and something else. Something sweet and yeasty that Naomi couldn't quite identify. Bread. Fresh bread. The women stopped walking. Several began to cry without sound, tears simply running down their hollow cheeks. Sergeant Hale gestured toward a large tent where steam rose from metal containers. "Dinner is ready," he said quietly. "Please, eat." Naomi looked at Yuki, then at the other women. In their eyes, she saw the same thought. They said America had no mercy. The mess tent held long wooden tables with benches. Industrial-sized pots sat on field stoves, tended by young soldiers who looked uncomfortable in their roles as servers rather than fighters. Naomi entered last, her nurse's instinct making her observe everything. The cleanliness of the surfaces, the steam rising from the pots, the way the soldiers kept their rifles slung over their backs rather than pointed forward. A corporal, his name tag read Davies, ladled rice into metal bowls. Real rice, white and fluffy. More than Naomi had seen in 6 months. Beside it, he placed a piece of bread. Golden brown and still warm. "Milk powder's there," he said, pointing to a tin. "Sugar if you want it. Vegetables in the pot on the left." Naomi accepted the bowl with both hands, the traditional gesture of respect, though she wasn't sure why she did it. Her fingers registered the warmth of the metal before her brain processed it. She sat at a table with Yuki and Chieko. All three stared at their food. "It could be poisoned," Chieko whispered. "Why else would they feed us so well?" But Yuki was already lifting a spoonful of rice to her lips. She closed her eyes as she chewed, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. "It's real," she breathed. "It's real." Naomi watched as, one by one, the women began to eat. Some devoured their portions frantically. Others ate slowly, deliberately, as if trying to memorize every bite. Several simply cried, unable to reconcile what they had been told with what they were experiencing. The bread was unlike anything Naomi had tasted, soft inside with a slight crust, faintly sweet. She had heard of Western bread but never imagined it would be like this. Sergeant Hale moved through the tent, checking that everyone had enough. When he reached Naomi's table, he paused. "Okay?" he asked in English, then repeated in broken Japanese. "Daijubu desu ka?" Naomi wanted to answer, but her throat had closed. She managed a small nod. He smiled, not triumphantly, but with something that looked like relief, and moved on. Across the tent, an older woman named Fumiko began sobbing openly. Her rice bowl clutched to her chest like a sacred object. A soldier approached, concerned, but she waved him away, still crying. "My son," she managed to say in Japanese, knowing he couldn't understand. "My son died 2 months ago. He was so hungry, so hungry." Chieko translated haltingly, and the soldier's face fell. He didn't say anything. What could he say? But he brought Fumiko more bread and a cup of weak tea. As darkness fell outside, lanterns were lit inside the tent. The women continued eating, slowly adjusting to the impossible reality of their situation. Naomi looked down at her empty bowl, then at the Americans moving quietly between tables. She thought of the propaganda posters in Tokyo showing monstrous enemy soldiers with fangs and claws. She thought of the capsules she had carried for weeks. She thought, what if we were wrong about everything? That first night, Naomi couldn't sleep. She lay on a canvas cot in a tent she shared with 11 other women, staring at the dark ceiling and trying to process the day's contradictions. In the underground hospital in Tokyo, she had watched 37 patients die in the final 3 weeks before evacuation. Not from wounds they had learned to manage wounds with almost no supplies, but from starvation and the diseases that followed. She remembered a 17-year-old soldier, barely conscious, whispering Okasan, Okasan, before his heart simply stopped from malnutrition. She remembered the frozen rice balls they had tried to make last, rationing them into portions so small they barely qualified as food. She remembered scraping mold off fermented soybeans and calling it a meal. And now, in an enemy camp, she had eaten more in one sitting than she had consumed in the previous 5 days. The cognitive dissonance was almost physical. "You're awake too," came Yuki's voice from the next cot. "Yes, I keep thinking I dreamed it. The food, the way they served us." Naomi turned onto her side to face the younger woman. In the darkness, Yuki's eyes reflected the faint moonlight coming through the tent flap. "We were taught they were demons," Yuki continued. "Literally. Professor Tanaka showed us propaganda films of American soldiers burning villages, laughing at corpses. He said they had no concept of honor or humanity." "I know. So what does that make us? Fools for believing it? Or fools for accepting their food now?" Naomi thought carefully before answering. As a nurse, she had learned that healing required accepting uncomfortable truths. Maybe we were just hungry people being fed by other hungry people who happened to win the war. Yuki was quiet for a long moment. "That's almost harder to accept. If they were monsters, we could hate them simply. If they're just people, then we have to rethink everything." The next morning brought more surprises. After breakfast, rice porridge with dried fish and pickled vegetables, clearly prepared with Japanese preferences in mind. Sergeant Hale gathered the women in the central yard. "We need help," he said through a translator. "A Japanese-American soldier named Private Tanaka. Medical help. Some of our men are sick. We heard there are nurses among you." Naomi felt 17 pairs of eyes turned toward her. She stepped forward slowly, I was a nurse. In Tokyo. Hale's face brightened. We have supplies. Real supplies. Can you help? The question itself was remarkable. Not an order. Not a demand. A request for help. From captor to captive, Naomi found herself nodding before she fully understood what she was agreeing to. She spent that afternoon in the camp's medical tent, treating American soldiers for dysentery, infected blisters, and heat exhaustion. The irony wasn't lost on her weeks ago. She would have been expected to let these men die. Now she was changing their dressings and administering antibiotics from supplies more abundant than anything she had seen in 2 years. One soldier, delirious with fever, grabbed her wrist. "Thanks, ma'am," he mumbled. "Thanks." She had no idea what the English words meant, but his tone was clear. Private Tanaka translated anyway. He says, "Thank you." Naomi felt something shift inside her chest, not quite forgiveness, not quite understanding, but perhaps the beginning of both. That evening, as she washed her hands in a basin of clean water, another luxury Sergeant Hale approached. "You're good at this," he said simply. Naomi looked at him directly for the first time. His eyes were the color of the ocean on a calm day. "I had a lot of practice," she replied in English, surprising herself. "But never enough supplies." He nodded slowly. "Understanding. War's waste, isn't it? On both sides." She found herself nodding back. "Kindness doesn't wear a flag," he added, more to himself than to her. Those words would stay with Naomi for the rest of her life. By the end of the first week, a routine had emerged. The women woke at dawn, shared breakfast, then divided into work groups. Some helped with laundry, washing soldiers' uniforms in large tubs. Others assisted in the kitchen, learning to prepare American-style meals alongside their Japanese contributions. Naomi continued working in the medical tent, her skills expanding as she learned new techniques from the camp's medic, a soft-spoken man from Virginia named Corporal William Foster. Foster taught her about sulfa drugs, proper wound irrigation, and the importance of hydration in treating dysentery. "You're a natural," he told her one afternoon, watching as she deftly sutured a soldier's hand laceration. "Better than half the medics I trained with." But the most surprising transformation happened in the kitchen. Sergeant Hale had noticed that several women seemed interested in how American food was prepared, the mysterious processes behind bread making, the strange dishes like cornbread and bean soup, the bitter dark liquid called coffee. He organized informal cooking lessons every other afternoon. The first session drew 8 women, including Yuki and Chieko. Private Davies, who had worked in his family's bakery in Pennsylvania, demonstrated how to make cornbread, cornmeal, flour, eggs, milk, and a little sugar, he explained through Private Tanaka's translation. "Mix it gentle. Don't overwork it. Then bake until golden." The women watched with intense concentration, as if memorizing a sacred ritual. When the first batch emerged from the field oven, golden and steaming, Davies cut it into squares and offered them around. Yuki took a bite and smiled, the first genuine smile Naomi had seen on the young woman's face since before the war. "It's like cake," Yuki said wonderingly. "But different. Less sweet. We eat it with butter and honey," Davies explained, "or alongside beans and meat." The next session covered soup making. Hale himself led this one, explaining the concept of stone soup, a story about villagers who created a feast by each contributing a small ingredient. "The idea," he said, "is that together, we can make something better than any of us could make alone." Naomi, observing from the medical tent doorway, recognized the metaphor immediately. This wasn't just about cooking. She thought of the hospital in Tokyo, where nurses hoarded their tiny rice portions, afraid to share lest they starve themselves. She thought of the competition for resources, the way scarcity had made them turn inward, protective, suspicious. Here, she watched American soldiers teaching enemy women how to share resources, how to build something collectively. Later that week, Yuki approached Naomi with a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "I made this," she said shyly, unwrapping it to reveal 3 rice balls, carefully shaped and filled with pickled plum. "I wanted to thank Sergeant Hale for the lessons, but I don't know if it's appropriate." Naomi considered this. The gesture was thoroughly Japanese, the offering of food as thanks, but the recipient was a man they had been taught to hate only months ago. I think, Naomi said slowly, that kindness is its own language. Give him the rice balls. Yuki did, later that afternoon. Hale accepted them with obvious pleasure. Bowing slightly in the Japanese style, an attempt at cultural respect that made several women hide smiles. He bit into one immediately, and his face lit up. This is incredible, he said. What's inside? Umeboshi, Yuki explained. Pickled plum. Very traditional. It's perfect, Hale replied. Thank you. He reached into his footlocker and produced 2 apples, real apples, probably from a care package, and offered them to Yuki. She accepted with both hands, bowing deeply. That night, Naomi overheard Yuki telling the other women, "He gave me apples, American apples. They're red and sweet and perfect." Someone laughed, a sound that had been absent from the camp since their arrival. Rice balls and apples, Chieko mused. Maybe that's what peace looks like. An exchange. Naomi thought about that as she fell asleep. Rice and apples, Japan and America. 2 things that seemed incompatible but somehow worked together. 3 weeks into their stay, Fumiko made a request. She approached Sergeant Hale during breakfast, with Private Tanaka translating, and pointed to a patch of empty ground beside the camp fence. "May we plant vegetables there?" she asked. "We have seeds, squash, beans, radish. We could grow food." Hale looked at the patch, then at Fumiko's hopeful face, then back at the ground. "I'll need to clear it with command," he said carefully, "but I don't see why not." Permission came 2 days later. The women approached the project with almost religious fervor. Fumiko led the effort, demonstrating proper techniques for tilling, planting, and watering. She had been a farmer's wife before the war, and her hands knew soil the way Naomi's knew medicine. Several American soldiers volunteered to help, intrigued by the process. Davies brought tools from the supply tent, shovels, rakes, a hoe. Another soldier, Private Lucas Bennett, contributed seeds his mother had sent from Idaho, carrots, lettuce, and something called zucchini. "We can share the harvest," Bennett suggested. "Grow food for everyone." The garden became a meeting place. Every morning and evening, women and soldiers worked side by side, turning soil, planting seeds, and discussing growing seasons despite the language barrier. Naomi found herself working next to Sergeant Hale one afternoon, both of them on their knees, digging small holes for radish seeds. "You ever gardened before?" he asked. "No," she admitted. "I grew up in Yokohama." "City girl," he smiled. "Me too. Detroit. Never saw a real farm until the Army sent me to training in Nebraska." They worked in companionable silence for a while, the earth cool and damp under Naomi's fingers. "Can I ask you something?" Hale said eventually. "Yes. What did you think of us? Before, Americans." Naomi sat back on her heels, considering honesty versus politeness. She chose honesty. "We were taught you were demons. Literally. That you had no culture, no honor, no humanity. That you would torture prisoners and celebrate death." Hale nodded slowly, unsurprised. "We were taught similar things about Japanese soldiers. That surrender was impossible. That you'd rather die than accept defeat. That you saw us as less than human. And now," he looked at his dirt-stained hands, then at the rows of seeds they had planted together. "Now I think war makes people say terrible things about each other so they can justify terrible actions. And peace is just stopping that. Seeing each other as people who also get dirt under their fingernails." It was the most profound thing Naomi had heard since the war ended. That evening, she sat with Yuki and Chieko near the garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. "I never thought I'd laugh again," Yuki said quietly. "But today, Private Bennett tried to say daikon, and it came out daikon. And I laughed so hard. I cried." "We're healing," Chieko observed. "Slowly, but we're healing." Naomi thought about the garden, about seeds planted in soil that had seen war, about vegetables that would grow from cooperation between former enemies. Maybe that's what forgiveness looks like, she said. Not forgetting what happened, but choosing to grow something new anyway. The garden became a symbol for the entire camp. Women brought seeds from their home villages. Soldiers contributed tools and knowledge. Together, they created something neither group could have made alone. When the first radishes emerged 2 weeks later, Fumiko cried. New life, she whispered, touching the green shoots with trembling fingers. Even here, especially here, not everyone adjusted smoothly. Lieutenant Kenji Mori had been captured 3 days after the women arrived. A former Imperial Army officer, he had refused to surrender until his men literally starved and could no longer hold weapons. He was gaunt, hardened, and deeply bitter. The Americans kept male prisoners in a separate compound, but occasionally the groups intersected during mealtimes or work details. Mori saw the women working alongside Americans, saw them laughing, saw them accepting food and teaching cooking in return. It disgusted him. One afternoon, as Naomi returned from the medical tent, Mori intercepted her near the fence line. Nurse Takahashi, he said coldly. A word. She stopped, wary. You shame yourself, he continued, his voice low and hard. All of you. Accepting charity from the enemy. Working for them. Smiling at them. Naomi felt her spine stiffen. We're accepting food, Lieutenant, not charity. There's a difference. Is there? His eyes burned with intensity. They destroyed our cities. Killed our people. And now you thank them for scraps? They're feeding us meals that their own soldiers eat. Naomi replied, keeping her voice level. That's not scraps. It's manipulation. They want you grateful, compliant. They want you to forget what they did to Hiroshima, to Nagasaki, to Tokyo. The names hung in the air like ghosts. Naomi felt the familiar weight of grief settle on her shoulders. She hadn't forgotten. None of them had forgotten. I haven't forgotten anything, she said quietly. I remember every patient who died in my care, every bombing raid, every moment of terror. But I also remember being so hungry I couldn't stand. And I remember these men, these enemy soldiers, feeding me without asking for anything in return. They ask for your dignity. No, Naomi said firmly. They ask for nothing. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Mori's jaw clenched. You're naive, or foolish, or both. Maybe, Naomi acknowledged. But I'm also alive. And so are you, Lieutenant, because they chose mercy over revenge. She walked away before he could respond, her hands shaking. That evening, she sought out Sergeant Hale. He was in the supply tent, reviewing inventory. Can I ask you something? She said. He looked up, immediately attentive. Of course. Why are you doing this? Really? Feeding us. Teaching us. Treating us. Like people. Hale set down his clipboard and sighed deeply. You want the official answer or the real one? The real one. Because I'm tired, he said simply. I'm tired of killing. I'm tired of watching people die. I'm tired of hate. He paused. My brother was at Okinawa. He wrote me a letter before he died. Said he was so sick of war that he couldn't remember what peace felt like. He asked me to remember for him when it was over. Naomi felt tears prick her eyes. So that's what I'm doing, Hale continued. Remembering peace. Practicing it. Hoping it becomes real. Lieutenant Mori thinks I'm betraying my country by being here. By accepting your help. Hale considered this carefully. Maybe peace begins when we stop starving each other. Physically, emotionally, morally. Maybe it begins exactly here. In small moments. Between tired people who just want to stop fighting. Naomi nodded slowly. Those words felt true in a way that transcended language or nationality. Thank you, she said. For what? For remembering peace when the rest of us had forgotten what it looked like. That night, by lantern light, Naomi wrote a letter. Paper was scarce, provided by the camp's limited supplies. But Sergeant Hale had given each woman several sheets with the promise that letters would be delivered once reliable postal routes reopened. Naomi had no idea if her mother was still alive, if their house in Yokohama still stood, if the address she carefully wrote on the envelope would lead anywhere. But she wrote anyway, because hope required action. Dear Mother, I pray this letter finds you alive and well. I pray our house still stands. I pray you remember me. I am in an American camp near Shiogama. Please do not worry, I am not imprisoned in the way we feared. I am not starving. I am not hurt. Mother, I must tell you something that will sound impossible. I am being treated with kindness. The American soldiers here feed us rice, bread, vegetables, real food, abundant and warm. They have let us plant a garden. They teach us their cooking, and we teach them ours. When I work in their medical tent, they treat me as a colleague, not a captive. I know what the propaganda told us. I believed it too. But Mother, these men are not demons. They are tired boys who miss their families, who carry photographs of sweethearts and mothers, who cry sometimes when they think no one is watching. Yesterday, a soldier named Private Davies gave me an apple, just handed it to me with a shy smile and walked away. I sat under a tree and ate it slowly, and Mother, I wept, not from sadness, but from the impossible tenderness of the gesture. I think about our last conversation before I left for Tokyo. You told me that wars are fought by ordinary people who have no choice, but peace is built by ordinary people who choose kindness. At the time, I didn't understand. I was young and angry and certain of my righteousness. Now I understand. There is a sergeant here named Hale. He lost his brother in Okinawa. I have lost friends in Tokyo. We should hate each other. By all logic, we should. But instead, yesterday we planted radish seeds together in the garden, and we talked about what we would cook when they grew. Is that not peace? Is that not what we were fighting for all along, the right to plant seeds and talk about future meals? I do not know when I will return home. I do not know what home looks like anymore, but I know that when I do return, I will bring these lessons with me. That enemies are just people we haven't fed yet. That mercy is stronger than revenge. That kindness builds what war destroys. Please take care of yourself, Mother. Please survive until I can see you again. Please save room in your heart for the possibility that the world is more complicated and more hopeful than we imagined. With love and longing, Naomi. She folded the letter carefully, sealed it, and added it to the outgoing mail basket. 3 weeks later, in Kyoto, a woman named Haruko Takahashi received a letter in handwriting she recognized as her daughter's. She sat in the ruins of what had been her neighbor's house and read it 3 times, crying throughout. When she finished, she pressed the letter to her chest and whispered, "My daughter is alive. My daughter is being fed. There is still hope." That evening, Haruko took her own small ration of rice and shared it with a widow and her 2 children who had nothing. It was a tiny gesture, perhaps meaningless in the scope of devastation surrounding them, but it was a beginning. November brought news. The women would be repatriated. Official channels had reopened. Transportation had been arranged. Within 2 weeks, they would return to their families, or to what remained of them. The announcement brought mixed emotions. Joy at going home, certainly, but also unexpected grief at leaving. Sergeant Hale organized a farewell dinner. It took 3 days to prepare. The soldiers pooled their ration supplies. Fumiko and the other women prepared traditional Japanese dishes using vegetables from their garden. Private Davies baked bread. Someone produced canned peaches, a luxury item traded from another unit. The evening of the dinner, the mess tent was decorated with paper lanterns that Yuki had made, their soft light casting warm shadows on the canvas walls. Tables were arranged in a large square so everyone could see each other, Americans and Japanese, soldiers and civilians, former enemies now something closer to friends. Sergeant Hale stood to speak, with Private Tanaka translating. "I'm not good at speeches," he began, and several people laughed gently. "But I want to say thank you. Thank you for teaching us that peace is possible. Thank you for trusting us when you had every reason not to. Thank you for showing us what it means to build something together." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "When this war started, I was taught that the enemy was inhuman, incapable of reason, mercy, or change. I believed it because it made my job easier. He looked directly at the women. You proved that belief wrong every single day. You showed us that humanity persists, even through the worst circumstances. That kindness is always a choice worth making. Naomi felt tears streaming down her face, and she wasn't alone. We can't undo what happened, Hale continued. We can't bring back the people we lost or rebuild the cities we destroyed. But maybe we can remember this. Remember that when we chose to see each other as people, everything changed, and maybe we can carry that forward. The meal that followed was magnificent not because of the food, though it was good, but because of what it represented. Cooperation, respect, shared humanity. Naomi sat between Yuki and Corporal Foster, eating rice and cornbread, laughing at Private Bennett's terrible attempts at speaking Japanese, listening to Fumiko teach Davies the proper way to make miso soup. Later, as the evening wound down, Sergeant Hale approached Naomi. He held something small wrapped in cloth. I wanted to give you this, he said quietly. She unwrapped it to find a handkerchief, plain white cotton with simple embroidery along the edges, a small apple tree. My grandmother made it, he explained. Sent it to me before I shipped out. I want you to have it. I can't. Please. His eyes were earnest. To remember that no one deserves to starve, that there's always a choice to be kind. Naomi accepted the handkerchief with trembling hands. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. He smiled, sad and hopeful simultaneously. Thank you for letting us prove we were better than our worst moments. They stood in silence for a moment, the party continuing around them, aware that this was goodbye. I hope you find your mother, Hale said finally. I hope you find home. I hope you find peace, Naomi replied. I think I already did, he said. Here, with all of you. The train to Kyoto took 8 hours, winding through a landscape of destruction. Naomi stared out the window at burned fields, collapsed bridges, cities reduced to rubble. Japan had surrendered, but the scars would remain for decades. Yuki sat beside her, clutching a small bag containing seeds from the camp garden, a gift from Fumiko. Do you think it will be the same? Yuki asked. Home? Naomi thought about her house in Yokohama, the neighborhood she had known since childhood, the streets she had walked every day. No, she said honestly, but maybe that's not the point anymore. Kyoto Station was chaos, thousands of displaced people searching for family, makeshift shelters in every corner, children begging for food. Naomi navigated through the crowds, Yuki close behind her, until they reached the district where her mother's sister lived. The house was still standing, though damaged. Aunt Keiko answered the door, and her face transformed from suspicion to shock to joy in the span of 3 seconds. Naomi, you're alive. Is my mother? Yes, she's here. She's been waiting, praying every day. Haruko Takahashi emerged from the back room, and mother and daughter fell into each other's arms, both sobbing. But joy was complicated. The city was starving. Food was scarce. Work was scarcer. Everyone had lost someone, lost something, lost pieces of themselves they could never recover. Naomi's mother was gaunt, aged 10 years in the months they had been apart. We're managing, Haruko said, which Naomi knew meant they were barely surviving. That night, in the small room they shared with 5 other family members, Naomi unwrapped Sergeant Hale's handkerchief. A few grains of sugar had spilled from her pocket into the cloth's folds, remnants from the camp, where sugar had been available. Almost commonplace. She looked at the tiny crystals sparkling in the candlelight, and suddenly had an idea. The next morning, she found a group of children playing in the rubble of a demolished building. 7 kids, all under 10 years old, skinny and hollow-eyed. Good morning, she said gently. Would you like something sweet? Their eyes went wide. Naomi carefully distributed the sugar grains, just a few per child, placed on their tongues like communion. A little boy named Taro closed his eyes in bliss. It tastes like a dream, he whispered. No, Naomi corrected gently. It tastes like peace. What's peace taste like? Asked a girl named Hana. Naomi thought about rice and cornbread, about apples and rice balls, about gardens planted by former enemies. Like knowing that even when things are hard, people can choose to be kind. Like remembering that we all get hungry. We all need food. We all want to live. And when we remember that about each other, really remember it, that's when we taste peace. The children didn't fully understand, but they nodded seriously, savoring the sweetness. Yuki, who had been watching, approached with her bag of seeds. "Should we plant these?" she asked. "In the empty lot behind your aunt's house?" Naomi smiled. "Yes, let's grow something." That afternoon, they began digging, turning rubble into soil, preparing ground for new growth. Several neighbors stopped to watch, curious about what two young women could possibly be doing with seeds in this destroyed landscape. "We're planting hope," Naomi explained simply, and slowly, one by one, others joined them. 20 years passed. Japan rebuilt itself, transformed from ashes into one of the world's most prosperous nations. The war became history, then memory, then something taught in schools. Naomi married not Sergeant Hale, who returned to Detroit and wrote her one letter saying he had opened a community garden in his neighborhood, but a kind doctor who had also spent the war years trying to save lives with insufficient resources. They had 2 children and a small restaurant in Kyoto. The restaurant's specialty was unusual: fusion dishes that combined Japanese and American culinary traditions, rice bowls with cornbread sides, miso soup with vegetables grown from American seed stock, apple pie made with Japanese techniques. On the wall hung a photograph, carefully framed and preserved. A garden beside a camp fence, with people both Japanese and American kneeling in the soil, planting together. Beneath it, mounted on cloth, was a handkerchief embroidered with an apple tree. Every Saturday, Naomi taught cooking classes for children. She showed them how to make cornbread, how to properly steam rice, how to prepare vegetables, how to share meals. "Why do we learn both styles?" a boy asked during one class. Naomi smiled. "Because food is a language, and the more languages you speak, the more people you can understand. And understanding, really understanding, is the first step toward peace." "Were you in the war, Takahashi-san?" asked a girl. "Yes." "Was it scary?" "Very scary. But I learned something important during that time." She paused, looking at the young faces watching her with such trust. "I learned that no war is ever truly won. The only victory that matters is the one where everyone gets to eat, to live, to grow, where former enemies can stand in a garden together and plant seeds for a future they'll share." After class, an elderly American tourist entered the restaurant. He was large, graying, with kind eyes that looked familiar somehow. "Excuse me," he said in careful Japanese. "Is this the restaurant run by Naomi Takahashi?" Her heart skipped. "I'm Naomi. I'm William Foster. I was a medic in Shiogama in 1945. Recognition flooded through her. "Corporal Foster." They embraced like old friends, both crying, both laughing. "I had to find you," he said, "to tell you that those months changed my life, that you taught me what medicine really means." That evening, they shared a meal, rice and cornbread, miso soup and apple pie, and they talked about a time when the world was broken but people chose kindness anyway. Outside, the smell of baking bread drifted into the street. Inside, former enemies shared food and stories and hope. And somewhere in the space between rice and apples, between memory and healing, between war and peace, reconciliation became real. The sweetest revenge was kindness itself.